Dr. Richard Coleman grabbed the withdrawal form, slammed it on the table 3 feet from a 19-year-old girl still on a ventilator, and pointed at Admiral Jonathan Pierce. "Sign it, now. Your daughter died 6 months ago. You just refuse to accept it. Every day she stays in this bed, a wounded Marine doesn't get one. You want that on your conscience too." He said this without looking at Emily once. Not once. Like she was furniture. Like the heartbeat on that monitor meant nothing. What Coleman didn't know was that a nurse nobody noticed, standing right behind him, had already found the proof that would end his career and save that girl's life. And what happened next shook the entire United States military medical system. Subscribe to this channel right now, follow this story to the very end, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. Now let me take you back to where it all started. The phone rang at Naval Station Norfolk at 9:17 on a Tuesday night. Admiral Jonathan Pierce picked it up on the second ring. He heard his aide's voice break on the first word, and that told him everything. "Sir, it's Emily. Car accident outside Annapolis. She's being airlifted to Walter Reed." Pierce hung up. He didn't ask how bad. He didn't ask what happened. He looked at the room full of officers waiting on his briefing and said, "We're done." Then he walked out. 43 minutes later, he was standing in a hallway at Walter Reed, still in his operational uniform, watching a trauma team push his daughter's gurney past him so fast he barely saw her face. He saw enough. Blood in her hair, a tube down her throat, hands everywhere. A surgeon stopped long enough to say 6 words. "We're doing everything we can." Pierce grabbed the man's arm. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now, Admiral." They took Emily into surgery. Pierce stood in that hallway for 4 hours. He didn't sit. He didn't call anyone. He didn't eat. He stood with his back against the wall, his arms at his sides, and he breathed, in and out, the way he did before a combat operation, the way he did when the situation was out of his hands, and the only thing he could control was whether he stayed standing. Emily Pierce was 19 years old. She was a sophomore at the Naval Academy. She didn't get in because of her father's name. She got in because she told him at 14, sitting on the back porch of their house in Virginia Beach, "Dad, I'm not riding your career. I'm building my own." And she meant it. Top of her class physically, Dean's List academically, called her father every Sunday at 7 in the morning because she knew he'd be awake. And she knew hearing her voice was the only thing that slowed him down. A driver crossed the center line on Route 50 doing 60, hit Emily's car on the driver's side. She had no pulse for nearly 4 minutes before first responders brought her back. They saved her heart, but the swelling in her brain was catastrophic. When the surgeon finally came out, he didn't sugarcoat it. "She's alive, Admiral, but the brain injury is severe. We've placed her on a ventilator. The next 72 hours will tell us more." Pierce nodded once. "Can I see her?" "Yes, sir." He walked into the ICU room and sat down next to his daughter. He took her hand. It was warm. He matched his breathing to the ventilator. In when it pushed, out when it released, like they were breathing together. He whispered, "I'm here, kid. I'm right here." That was night 1. Night 2, Dr. Richard Coleman introduced himself. He walked in without knocking, chart in hand, and started talking before Pierce even turned around. "Admiral, I'm Dr. Coleman, attending physician for the ICU. I need to walk you through realistic expectations for your daughter's prognosis." Pierce didn't stand. "Go ahead." "The swelling hasn't responded to treatment the way we hoped. We're seeing very limited brain activity. I want to prepare you for the possibility that Emily may not regain consciousness." Pierce turned his head slowly. "You've had her for 48 hours. "I understand that, sir." 48 hours, and you're already telling me she won't wake up? "I'm telling you what the data shows." "Then get better data." Coleman paused. He wasn't used to being challenged. Not here. Inside Walter Reed, Coleman ran his department like a machine. Efficient, disciplined, on schedule. Patients came in, received treatment, and were moved along. That was his system. And the system didn't have room for a case like Emily Pierce, a patient who wasn't improving, wasn't declining, and wasn't going anywhere. Week 2, week 3, Emily stayed the same. Ventilator, feeding tube, stable vitals, no response. Coleman ordered a brain death evaluation at the end of month 2. He walked into Pierce's room and said, "Admiral, I've scheduled a formal assessment. It's standard procedure at this stage." "What kind of assessment?" "Brain death protocol, reflex testing, apnea test. It will tell us definitively whether there's any function remaining." Pierce looked at him hard. "And if you find function, then we continue treatment. And if you don't?" Coleman held his gaze. "Then we have a different conversation." The tests were conducted on a Wednesday morning. Pierce wasn't allowed in the room during the evaluation. He waited outside, standing again, always standing. He wore his uniform that day too, like armor. Coleman came out 30 minutes later. His face was set. His voice was flat. "Admiral, the evaluation confirms brain death. No reflexes, no respiratory drive, no measurable brain activity. I'm sorry." Pierce stared at him. "Run them again." "Sir, I said run them again." Coleman's jaw tightened. "A second physician will review and confirm independently. That's protocol. But I want to be direct with you. The results will not change." The second confirmation came 2 days later. Dr. Lawrence Hendricks listed as the reviewing physician. Brain death confirmed. Signed and filed. That was the official record. What the official record didn't show was that Emily had midazolam in her system when they ran the reflex tests, a sedative, administered less than 2 hours before the evaluation, when protocol demanded a full washout period. The drug suppresses brainstem function. Running a brain death test on a sedated patient isn't just sloppy. It's like testing whether someone can hear while you've got your hands clamped over their ears. The record also didn't show that Dr. Hendricks wasn't in the building that day. He was on leave, in another state. His signature appeared on the document anyway. Nobody caught it. Nobody was looking. From month 3 forward, Coleman increased pressure on the Admiral. The conversations changed tone. They stopped being medical. They became administrative. "Admiral, I have to be transparent. This hospital serves active duty service members. Every day your daughter occupies this bed, someone else doesn't get it." Pierce's voice dropped to a register that had made captains flinch. "Did you just put a price tag on my daughter?" "I'm stating a reality." "Here's a reality for you, doctor. My wife died 3 years ago. Emily is the only family I have left on this earth. You want that bed? You go through me." Coleman didn't blink, but he also didn't push further that day. He didn't need to. He had something Pierce didn't. He had the paperwork. He had the diagnosis. And he had time. By month 5, the hospital's legal team sent Admiral Pierce a formal letter. 30 days to authorize withdrawal of life support. If no authorization was provided, the hospital would petition a military judge for authority to proceed. They were going to take Emily off the ventilator. Pierce called his attorney. He called a senator. He called his former commanding officer. Every one of them said the same thing. "Jonathan, the documentation is solid. 2 physicians confirmed brain death. Legally, the hospital is on firm ground." Nobody questioned the tests. Nobody questioned Coleman. Nobody except a nurse who walked onto the ICU floor on a Monday morning in month 5 and stopped in front of Emily's room. Hannah Brooks. New rotation, new badge, no reputation. On paper, she was a registered nurse with 3 years of civilian hospital experience. Nothing special, nothing notable. That was by design. Before she was a nurse, Hannah Brooks was a combat medic attached to a special operations forward surgical team in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. For 2 years, she treated blast injuries under fire, field-diagnosed traumatic brain injuries in conditions that would shut down any civilian ER in the country, and kept soldiers alive using techniques that existed in no textbook and no training manual. Just hard knowledge, passed from one combat medic to the next through blood and repetition. She left active duty quietly, told no one. She didn't want the title. She didn't want the looks. She wanted to start over as someone who healed people without a rank attached to her name. Walter Reed was supposed to be that fresh start. On her first day, she glanced at Emily's chart on the door. Brain dead, comfort care only, DNR. She looked through the glass at the girl in the bed. Then she looked at the monitors. Something was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, subtly wrong. The kind of wrong that only someone who had spent years reading vitals under gunfire would notice. Emily's heart rate was too steady. Her blood pressure patterns were too consistent. Brain-dead patients don't hold those numbers for 6 months. Not like this. Not without heavy pharmacological support. And according to the chart, Emily was on minimal medication. Hannah didn't say anything. Not that day. She came back the next day and checked again. Same patterns. Third day, she pulled Emily's full medical record and started reading, line by line. That's when her hands started shaking. She saw the midazolam dose. She saw the timestamp. She calculated the washout period and realized the reflex tests were conducted while Emily was still sedated. She cross-referenced Hendrick's signature with the staff schedule and found he wasn't on shift. Wasn't even in the state. Hannah set the tablet down on the break room table and pressed her palms flat against the surface to stop the trembling. She knew exactly what she was looking at. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't a judgment call. Someone falsified a brain death diagnosis on a 19-year-old patient inside a United States military hospital. And in less than 30 days, that falsified diagnosis would be used to end her life. She had 2 options. File a report through channels. It would take weeks. It would get buried in administrative review. The same people who created the problem would be the ones reviewing it. Or she could walk into that room and prove Emily Pierce was alive in front of witnesses who couldn't look away. She didn't rush. That was the thing about Hannah. Afghanistan taught her the most dangerous thing in a crisis is speed without precision. You watch, you plan, you pick your moment, and when it comes, you don't hesitate. She spent 4 more days observing Emily. She studied the ventilator cycles. She tracked the cardiac rhythm. She noted micro fluctuations in blood pressure that nobody else caught because nobody else was watching. By day 7, she was ready. Thursday morning, Coleman scheduled his final meeting with the Admiral. He called it a family consultation. It was an execution order with a polite name. Pierce walked in wearing full dress uniform for the first time since the accident. He sat down across from Coleman. 2 Navy JAG officers stood near the door. A hospital administrator stood behind Coleman. The power balance in that room was so tilted, it was almost violent. Coleman put the form on the table and pushed it forward. 6 months, Admiral. No brain activity. It's time. Pierce looked at the paper. He didn't touch it. What if you're wrong? Coleman exhaled. I'm not wrong. 2 physicians confirmed it. The hospital has been patient, but prolonging this isn't compassion, Admiral. It's cruelty. Pierce's eyes went dark. You do not get to use that word in this room. I'm using medical terminology. You're sitting 3 feet from my daughter and calling her life cruel. Coleman stood up. With or without your signature, this hospital will proceed. I wanted to give you the dignity of a choice, but the choice has a deadline. The room was locked in silence. Every person in it was waiting for the Admiral to reach for the pen. Then Hannah Brooks stepped forward. She'd been standing by the monitor station, adjusting an IV line, invisible, the way nurses always are in rooms full of officers and physicians. She walked into the center of the room with a calm that didn't belong there. Sir, she said, looking directly at the Admiral, may I try one thing before you sign that? Coleman whipped around. Nurse Brooks, step back. This is not your conversation. It will take 30 seconds, Doctor. I gave you a direct order. 30 seconds, that's all. The Admiral studied her. He didn't know who she was, didn't know her background, didn't know about Helmand Province or the forward surgical team, or the soldiers she'd brought back when everyone else had called it. All he saw was a young woman asking for half a minute. "Let her," Pierce said. "Admiral, I must insist." "I said let her." The room stopped. Hannah moved to Emily's bedside. She placed 2 fingers behind Emily's left ear, in the soft depression between the mastoid process and the upper cervical spine, a pressure point used by special operations medics to test brainstem integrity in blast injury patients. Not taught in any civilian program, not in any of Coleman's textbooks. Developed in combat by people who learned that the brain doesn't quit the way hospitals think it does. She pressed, firm, controlled, steady. The cardiac monitor beeped its flat rhythm. Then it spiked. Small, sharp, clean. Then again, 2 responses, perfectly timed with the pressure. Coleman stepped forward fast. "That's artifact, electrical interference. It means nothing." Hannah didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the Admiral. "That is not artifact. That is a brainstem response. Your daughter's brain reacted to external stimulation." Coleman's face changed, not to concern, to fear. "I'm ordering you to step away from that patient, Nurse Brooks." Hannah lowered her hands, turned to face him. Her voice carried no anger, but it carried something heavier, the kind of weight that comes from knowing the truth and refusing to let it be buried. "Dr. Coleman, I am formally requesting a neurological reevaluation of this patient based on a reproducible brainstem response observed in the presence of multiple witnesses. If you deny this request, I will document it and escalate it to the Chief of Medical Staff within the hour." Nobody moved. Coleman looked at the JAG officers, looked at the administrator, looked at the Admiral. Every eye in the room was on him now, and every one of those eyes held the same question. "What are you afraid of, Doctor?" The Admiral stood, slowly. He didn't look at the paperwork on the table. He looked at Coleman the way he'd looked at enemy vessels on open water. Steady, final. "Call neurology." Coleman didn't move. "Dr. Coleman." Pierce's voice dropped so low it was almost inaudible. "Call neurology. Now." Coleman reached for the phone. 40 minutes later, Dr. Melissa Grant, U.S. Navy Medical Corps, senior neurologist, walked into the ICU. 15 years of experience, a reputation for trusting no one's findings but her own. She looked at the monitor printout Hannah had saved. She looked at Coleman standing in the corner with his arms crossed and his face gray. She looked at Hannah. "Show me." Hannah repeated the technique. Same placement, same pressure. The monitor spiked again. Grant studied the waveform, studied the timing. Then she pulled her pen light and opened Emily's eyelids. The left pupil constricted, slowly, unevenly, but it constricted. Grant straightened up. "I'm ordering a full reevaluation, apnea test, reflex battery, EEG, CT, angiography, effective immediately." Coleman stepped forward. "Dr. Grant, this is my patient. The diagnosis was confirmed 6 months ago by 2 physicians. This nurse's demonstration doesn't—" "I didn't ask you, Dr. Coleman." Grant didn't turn around. "And she's not your patient anymore." Coleman stood there, his mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in 6 months, the man who had controlled every decision in this case had no control at all. The Admiral hadn't moved from the foot of Emily's bed. His hands were clasped behind his back. The posture of a man who has spent a lifetime commanding others, now standing completely still because the only thing left to do was trust the people fighting for his daughter. His eyes never left Emily's face, and deep behind his ribs, in the place where grief had turned to stone, something cracked. Not hope, not yet. Something more fragile, something older. The refusal to let go of someone you love. Hannah waited until the room cleared. She adjusted Emily's blanket the way she did every shift. Then she leaned down close and whispered, "I see you in there. and I'm not leaving. The monitor beeped, steady, alive. The call to neurology changed everything and nothing at the same time. Dr. Melissa Grant had taken control of Emily's case, ordered a full battery of tests, and stripped Coleman of his authority over the patient. But Coleman was still in the building, still wearing his badge, still walking the halls with the kind of quiet fury that made every nurse on the floor avoid eye contact. Hannah noticed it immediately. Within an hour of Grant's arrival, Coleman had already spoken to 3 different administrators. She saw him in the corridor outside the executive wing, gesturing sharply, his voice low, but his body language screaming. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't a medical discussion. It was damage control. Hannah didn't have time to worry about that. Grant had asked her to assist with the reevaluation personally, and the tests were starting within the hour. The first test was the reflex battery. Grant stood at Emily's bedside with 2 assisting physicians, both Navy Medical Corps. Both called in specifically because Grant didn't trust anyone already assigned to the case. She was methodical. She tested corneal reflexes. She tested gag response. She tested pain withdrawal in all 4 extremities. Emily's left hand twitched when Grant applied pressure to her nail bed. One of the assisting physicians leaned forward. "That could be spinal." Grant shook her head. "The timing's wrong for spinal reflex. It's delayed. That's cortical processing, not automatic." She tested it again. Same hand, same delay, same twitch. "Document it," Grant said. "Timestamp it. I want everything on record from this point forward." Hannah stood by the monitor, writing every observation by hand in a separate notebook she had started keeping the day she first found the inconsistencies in Emily's chart. She didn't trust the hospital's electronic system. Not anymore. The apnea test came next. This was the critical one. Brain death protocol requires that when the ventilator is temporarily removed, the patient must show 0 respiratory effort. If the patient makes any attempt to breathe on their own, brain death cannot be declared. Grant looked at Hannah. "How long has she been on the current ventilator settings?" 6 months, unchanged since the original evaluation. "Nobody adjusted them? Not once?" "No, ma'am." Grant pressed her lips together. That alone was a red flag. Standard care required periodic reassessment of ventilator settings, even for brain-dead patients. Leaving them unchanged for 6 months suggested the medical team had stopped treating Emily as a patient long ago. Grant disconnected the ventilator. The room went silent. No mechanical breathing, no rhythmic push of air, just the cardiac monitor beeping and every person in the room watching Emily's chest. 10 seconds, nothing. 20 seconds, nothing. Anna watched Emily's face, not the monitors, the face, because she had learned in Afghanistan that the body tells you things machines miss. 30 seconds. Emily's throat moved. It was small, a contraction of the muscles just above the collarbone. Not a full breath, not even close, but it was an effort, an attempt. The brainstem sending a signal to the lungs that said, "Breathe." "There," Hannah said. Grant saw it too. "Reconnect the ventilator." The machine resumed. Emily's chest rose and fell again with mechanical precision. But what had just happened in those 30 seconds changed everything. Grant turned to the room. "This patient is not brain dead. She has spontaneous respiratory effort. The original diagnosis is invalid." One of the assisting physicians spoke carefully. "Dr. Grant, could that have been a reflexive?" "No, I've run this test hundreds of times. That was respiratory drive, weak but present. This patient has brainstem function." She picked up the phone on the wall and called radiology. "I need a CT angiography and a full EEG on Emily Pierce within the next 2 hours. Priority 1. Clear the schedule if you have to." She hung up and turned to Hannah. "Nurse Brooks, I want you with her every second until those tests are complete. No one adjusts her medication without my direct authorization. No one." "Understood." "And Nurse Brooks." "Yes, ma'am." Grant held her gaze for a long moment. Whatever you saw on her chart, I'm going to need it. All of it. Bring it to me after the scans. Hannah nodded. Grant knew. She hadn't said it outright, but she knew something was wrong beyond a misdiagnosis. The way she'd frozen Coleman out, the way she'd brought in outside physicians, the way she demanded everything be time-stamped and documented. Grant wasn't just reevaluating a patient, she was building a case. They moved Emily to radiology at 11:15 that morning. Anna walked beside the gurney, one hand on the rail, her eyes scanning every face they passed. She didn't know who was loyal to Coleman and who wasn't. In a hospital this political, that kind of uncertainty was dangerous. The CT angiography took 40 minutes. Hannah stood outside the imaging room and waited. When the radiologist came out, his face told her something before his words did. There's blood flow, he said quietly, reduced but present. And there's something else. I need Dr. Grant to see this. Grant arrived 12 minutes later. The radiologist pulled up the scan on the monitor, and Hannah watched Grant's expression shift from professional focus to something close to anger. Brainstem compression, Grant said. Look at this. The swelling from the original injury created pressure on the brainstem. It's been compressing the pons and medulla for months. Meaning what? The radiologist asked. Meaning this condition can mimic brain death almost perfectly. Suppressed reflexes, absent respiratory drive, flat affect on standard testing. But the brain isn't dead, it's trapped. The signals can't get through because the pathway is physically compressed. She stepped back from the monitor. This is a treatable condition. Reduce the intracranial pressure, relieve the compression, and there's a chance, a real chance, that function returns. Hannah felt her knees go weak. She put her hand on the wall to steady herself, not because she was surprised, because she had been right. And being right meant that for 6 months, Emily Pierce had been locked inside her own body while the people responsible for her care prepared to kill her. Grant wasn't finished. Pull the EEG, I want to see cortical activity. The EEG was conducted at 1:45 that afternoon. Hannah placed the electrodes herself because she trusted her own hands more than anyone else's at that point. She positioned each one with the precision of someone who had done this under mortar fire, and when the machine started recording, she held her breath. The lines moved. Not much, not the robust, rolling waves of a fully conscious brain, but they moved. Small, irregular patterns that appeared and disappeared like radio signals fighting through static. Minimal cortical activity. Present, real, documented. Grant looked at the printout for a long time. Then she looked at Hannah. 6 months, she said quietly. This girl has been in there for 6 months. Hannah said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't break the professional composure she was barely holding together. Grant straightened up. I'm going to speak with the Admiral. Then I'm going to request Emily's complete medical file. Every page, every log, every signature, and then I'm going to find out how this happened. What happened next moved fast. Grant walked into the Admiral's room at 2:30. Pierce was standing where he always stood, at the foot of Emily's bed, hands behind his back. He hadn't left the room since the morning. Grant didn't soften it. She respected him too much for that. Admiral, your daughter is not brain dead. She has brainstem function, spontaneous respiratory effort, and minimal cortical activity on EEG. The CT scan shows brainstem compression from the original injury, which has been mimicking brain death for the duration of her stay. This condition is treatable. Pierce didn't move. His face didn't change, but his hands, clasped behind his back, gripped each other so hard his knuckles turned white. The original diagnosis, he said slowly, was wrong. The original diagnosis is no longer valid, sir. I've confirmed that independently. For 6 months. Yes, sir. For 6 months, my daughter has been alive inside that body, and this hospital told me she was dead. Grant held his gaze. That is what the evidence shows. Pierce's breathing changed. It got deeper, slower. The breathing of a man pulling himself back from an edge. What do you need to treat her? I've already contacted the neurosurgery department. We'll need to reduce the intracranial pressure first, then targeted stimulation therapy. It will take time, but the brainstem response Nurse Brooks identified gives us a real foundation to work from. Then do it. There's something else, Admiral. Pierce waited. Grant chose her words carefully. When I reviewed the initial brain death evaluation, I found irregularities, medication that should have been cleared before testing, documentation that doesn't align with staff records. I can't make any formal accusations, but I strongly recommend that you request an independent investigation into the original evaluation process. The room went still. Pierce turned and looked at Grant with eyes that had changed. The grief was still there, but something else had moved in front of it. Something cold. Something operational. Irregularities, he repeated. Yes, sir. What kind of irregularities? The kind that require people with badges, not stethoscopes. Pierce understood. He walked to the phone on the wall and picked it up. He dialed a number from memory. The call lasted 11 seconds. This is Admiral Jonathan Pierce. I need an NCIS team at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Bethesda. Today. This is not a request. He hung up. 3 hours later, 2 NCIS special agents walked through the front entrance of the hospital. Word traveled through the building like a shockwave. Nurses whispered. Residents went quiet. Administrative staff found urgent reasons to be in their offices with the doors closed. Coleman heard about it at 4:17. He was in the cafeteria when his phone buzzed. Hannah was 2 tables away, eating a sandwich she couldn't taste, when she watched the color drain from his face. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. His coffee spilled. He didn't notice. He walked out without cleaning it up, and he walked fast. Hannah followed at a distance. Not because she was investigating, because she needed to know if he was going to try to destroy evidence. He went straight to the records office. Hannah watched him badge in through the secure door. She couldn't follow him inside, but she didn't need to. She had already copied everything she needed 3 days ago. Every medication log, every timestamp, every signature page. Stored on a personal drive she kept in her locker. She pulled out her phone and texted Grant. Coleman just entered medical records. Alone. Grant's reply came in 8 seconds. Stay where you are. I'm calling NCIS. 20 minutes later, one of the agents intercepted Coleman coming out of the records office. Hannah didn't hear the conversation, but she saw Coleman's face when the agent showed his credentials. It was the face of a man who had just realized the walls were closing in. By 6 o'clock that evening, NCIS had secured Emily's complete medical file. They had also pulled the electronic access logs showing who had viewed, edited, or printed any part of her chart in the last 6 months. Coleman had accessed her chart 14 minutes before the agents arrived. He had attempted to modify the medication log. He failed. The system kept a shadow copy of every edit. The original data was intact. At 7:15, the agents asked Coleman to come to a conference room for a voluntary interview. He brought a JAG attorney. The interview lasted 2 hours. Hannah didn't know what was said behind that door, but when Coleman came out, he wasn't wearing his hospital badge anymore. It was over for him. He just didn't know how over it was yet. That night, Hannah sat in Emily's room alone. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The ventilator pushed air. The room was quiet in the way hospitals are quiet at night. Not actually silent, but carrying a kind of stillness that makes you hear your own heartbeat. She looked at Emily's face. 19 years old, 6 months in this bed, 6 months of being classified as dead, while her brain fought to stay alive behind a wall of compressed tissue and falsified records. Hannah had seen soldiers in Afghanistan survive injuries that defied medical explanation. She had watched men open their eyes after everyone in the field hospital had written them off. She knew the human body was more stubborn than any diagnosis, more resilient than any chart, and more alive than any institution was willing to admit. She took Emily's hand, not as a medic, not as a nurse, as one human being holding on to another. "The hard part's coming," Hannah whispered. "Treatment's going to be rough. Recovery's going to be slow. But you already did the impossible part. You stayed alive when everyone told you that you were dead. Everything after this is just proving them wrong." The monitor beeped, and then something happened that Hannah wasn't prepared for. Emily's fingers moved. Not a twitch, not a reflex. A slow, deliberate curl around Hannah's hand. A squeeze. Hannah froze. She looked down at their hands. She looked at the monitor, heart rate elevated by 4 beats per minute, consistent with a conscious response to emotional stimulation. She squeezed back. "I feel you," Hannah said. Her voice cracked for the first time since this whole thing started. "I feel you, Emily." She reached for the call button with her free hand. She didn't let go of Emily with the other. The night nurse arrived in 40 seconds. Hannah's voice was steady again by the time the door opened. "Page Dr. Grant. Tell her Emily Pierce just demonstrated a voluntary motor response. Documented. Witnessed. Right now." The night nurse looked at Hannah's hand, wrapped in Emily's fingers, and covered her mouth. "Go," Hannah said. "Page her now." Grant arrived at 11:40. She conducted a rapid assessment. She asked Emily to squeeze her right hand. Emily squeezed. She asked Emily to squeeze her left hand. Nothing. She asked for the right hand again. Emily squeezed. Reproducible. Lateralized. Voluntary. Grant stood up and looked at Hannah. "How long have you been sitting here?" "Since 8. You should go home." "No, ma'am." Grant studied her for a moment. Then she nodded. Not as a superior to a subordinate, as one soldier to another. "Stay as long as you need," Grant said. She left to update the file. Hannah stayed. At midnight, the Admiral came back. He had gone to a hotel for 2 hours on Grant's insistence, the first time he'd left the hospital in 3 days. When he walked into the room and saw Hannah holding Emily's hand, he stopped in the doorway. "She squeezed," Hannah said. "On command. Twice." Pierce walked to the other side of the bed. He took Emily's left hand, the one that hadn't responded. He held it anyway. "Emily," he said. His voice was rough. "It's Dad." The cardiac monitor jumped. Heart rate up 6 beats, sustained. Not a spike, a sustained elevation. The kind that happens when a patient recognizes a voice they love. Pierce saw it. Hannah saw it. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. The Admiral held his daughter's hand and breathed with her the way he had on the first night, matching the ventilator, in and out, in and out, like they were one body keeping each other alive. At 12:22 in the morning, Emily's eyelids fluttered. They didn't open, not yet, but they moved. Rapid, uncoordinated movements beneath closed lids, like a person fighting to wake up from a dream that had lasted 6 months too long. Hannah leaned forward. "She's trying." Pierce tightened his grip on his daughter's hand. "Then we wait." They waited. And in the hallway outside, a hospital that had tried to declare this girl dead was now scrambling to explain how she was still alive. Emily's eyelids fluttered again at 6:14 in the morning. Hannah hadn't slept. She was still in the chair beside the bed, still holding Emily's hand when the movement came. Stronger this time. Not the rapid, chaotic twitching from midnight. This was slower, more deliberate, like someone pushing against a door that had been locked for half a year. Admiral Pierce was asleep in the chair on the other side. Not real sleep, the shallow, upright rest of a man who had trained himself to wake at the slightest change in sound. When Hannah whispered his name, his eyes opened instantly. "She's doing it again," Hannah said. Pierce leaned forward. He watched his daughter's face. The eyelids trembled. The muscles around her mouth tightened. Her head turned half an inch to the left, toward the sound of Hannah's voice. "Emily," Pierce said. "Emily, it's Dad. Open your eyes." The cardiac monitor climbed. 4 beats. 6 beats. 8 beats above baseline. Emily's lips parted. No sound came out, but the effort was there. The brain was sending signals. The body was trying to respond. Then it stopped. The eyelids went still. The heart rate settled. Emily slipped back under, pulled down by whatever weight 6 months of compression and stillness had placed on her nervous system. Pierce exhaled slowly. How many times has she done this? 3 since midnight, each one stronger than the last. She's fighting. Yes, sir, she is. At 7 o'clock, Dr. Grant arrived for morning rounds. She reviewed the overnight data Hannah had recorded by hand. Every twitch, every heart rate fluctuation, every moment of eyelid movement, time-stamped to the second. Grant read it twice. She's cycling. The brainstem is attempting to establish a wake-sleep rhythm. That's significant. How significant? Pierce asked. It means her brain isn't just alive, Admiral. It's trying to reorganize. It's trying to wake her up. Grant made the call to neurosurgery at 7:20. The surgeon who answered was Captain David Hope, a man with 17 years of experience in traumatic brain injury and a reputation for being the calmest person in any operating room. Grant explained the case in under 3 minutes. Holt listened without interrupting. Brainstem compression from sustained edema, Holt repeated. 6 months untreated. Correct. And she's showing voluntary motor response and respiratory effort despite the compression. Correct. Holt was quiet for 5 seconds. That's one tough kid. I'll be there in an hour. Holt arrived at 8:30. He reviewed the CT angiography, the EEG, and Grant's notes. Then he examined Emily himself. He spent 20 minutes testing her responses, checking her reflexes, pressing his thumb into different pressure points, and watching the monitor for reactions. When he finished, he looked at the Admiral. Sir, I'm going to be straight with you because I think you'd rather have the truth than comfort. Always. Your daughter has brainstem compression that's been building pressure for 6 months. The good news is the brain tissue itself appears viable. The signals are there. They're just being blocked by the swelling. If we can reduce the intracranial pressure, there's a real possibility those signals break through. What's the bad news? 6 months is a long time. The longer the brain sits under compression, the harder recovery becomes. I can relieve the pressure. I can't guarantee what comes after. Pierce looked at Emily. What do you need from me? Your consent for a surgical intervention. We'll place an external ventricular drain to reduce the fluid pressure, followed by targeted decompression. It's not a small procedure, but it's her best shot. When? Today. The sooner the better. Every hour of continued compression is an hour we can't get back. Pierce didn't hesitate. Do it. Holt nodded and turned to Grant. I want her in the OR by noon. Full team. And I want that nurse in there. He pointed at Hannah. She knows this patient better than anyone in this building. Grant looked at Hannah. You up for it? Hannah stood. I've been up for it since day one. They prepped Emily for surgery at 10 o'clock. Hannah helped transfer her to the surgical gurney. She checked every line, every tube, every connection, the way she used to check a wounded soldier before a medevac flight. Thorough, precise, no detail too small. Pierce walked beside the gurney as far as the surgical wing doors. That was where he had to stop. He stood at those doors the same way he had stood in the hallway 6 months ago when they first brought Emily in. Back straight, hands at his sides, the face of a man holding himself together through sheer discipline. Anna paused at the threshold and turned back to him. Admiral. Yes, I'll take care of her. Pierce looked at this woman he'd known for barely 48 hours. This nurse who had appeared from nowhere and torn apart everything the hospital had told him was true. He nodded once. I know you will. The doors closed between them. Surgery began at 12:15. Holt worked with the focus of a man who understood exactly what was at stake. The drain placement went clean, fluid began releasing almost immediately, and the pressure readings started to drop within the first 20 minutes. Hannah monitored Emily's vitals from the corner of the OR. She watched the numbers the way a combat medic watches a casualty under fire. Not hoping, observing, trusting the process but ready to react. At 12:40, something changed on the EEG. The flat, minimal patterns they've been seeing for days suddenly jumped. A burst of activity, irregular but unmistakable. "Captain Holt," Hannah said calmly, "EEG activity is spiking." Holt glanced at the monitor. "That's the brain responding to the pressure drop. It's waking up." He didn't smile, but his hands moved faster. Not from panic, from urgency. The brain was ready. He needed to clear the path. By 1:30, the intracranial pressure had dropped 40%. Holt completed the decompression and closed. Total surgical time, 1 hour and 18 minutes. "Clean," Holt said, stripping his gloves. "Now we wait. The next 24 hours will tell us if the brain takes advantage of the space we just gave it." Hannah stayed with Emily in post-op recovery. She didn't leave to eat. She didn't leave to make calls. She sat in the chair beside the bed and watched the monitors the way she had watched them every night since she'd first found the inconsistencies in Emily's chart. At 3:15, Emily's right hand moved. Not a squeeze, not a response to a command, a spontaneous movement. Her fingers opened and closed twice, then rested. Hannah documented it, time-stamped, noted. At 4 o'clock, Emily's eyes moved beneath her lids again. But this time, the movement was different. It was organized, lateral tracking, as if she was watching something behind her closed eyelids. Something real. At 4:22, the Admiral was allowed into recovery. He walked in quietly and sat down. He didn't ask for an update. He could see it on the monitor. The EEG was showing more activity than it had at any point in 6 months. The brain was waking up, not all at once, not like flipping a switch, like a city restoring power after a blackout, one grid at a time, flickering and uncertain, but undeniably coming back online. "Talk to her," Hannah said. "She responds to your voice more than anything else." Pierce pulled his chair close. He took Emily's hand and started talking. Not about the hospital, not about the tests. He talked about home. He talked about the porch in Virginia Beach. He talked about the time Emily was 12 and tried to sail his dinghy across the Chesapeake Bay by herself and got picked up by a Coast Guard patrol 2 miles from shore. "You were so mad at me for calling them," Pierce said. "You told me you had it under control. 12 years old, 2-foot swells, and you told me you had it under control." The cardiac monitor climbed. Steady elevation, 12 beats above baseline, sustained. Emily's right hand squeezed his. Pierce stopped talking. He looked down at their hands. He looked at Hannah. "She squeezed," he said. His voice broke on the second word. "She hears you, Admiral." Pierce brought his daughter's hand to his forehead and pressed it there. His shoulders shook once. Just once. Then he breathed deep and steadied himself the way he always did. "I'm here, kid," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." At 5 o'clock, NCIS requested a meeting with Dr. Grant. The investigation had moved faster than anyone expected. The agents had finished their initial review of the medical records, the access logs, and the staff schedules. What they found was worse than a single forged signature. Grant met with the lead agent, Special Agent Marcus Torres, in a private office on the 3rd floor. Torres was a 15-year veteran of NCIS with a background in fraud investigation. He didn't do small talk. "Dr. Grant, we've completed our preliminary review. I need you to confirm some findings." "Go ahead." The medication log for Emily Pierce shows midazolam administered at 09:47 on the morning of the brain death evaluation. The evaluation itself is documented as starting at 1100. That's a 73-minute gap. Standard protocol requires a minimum washout period of how long? For midazolam, at least 24 hours before any brain death testing. 73 minutes is not even close. Dr. Lawrence Hendricks is listed as the confirming physician on the brain death determination. Our records show Hendricks was on approved leave from March 23rd through March 28th. The evaluation occurred on March 25th. He wasn't here. No, ma'am, he was not. We've already spoken with Dr. Hendricks. He states he was never informed that his name was used on the document and did not sign it. Grant sat back. Someone forged his signature. That's what the evidence indicates. We've also found that Dr. Coleman accessed Emily Pierce's electronic medical record 14 minutes before our team secured the file yesterday. The system's audit trail shows he attempted to modify the medication log entry for the morning of the brain death evaluation. The modification failed because the system maintains a protected backup, but the attempt is logged. Grant's hands clenched on the arms of her chair. He tried to cover it up. While we were in the building, yes. What happens now? Torres closed his folder. Dr. Coleman has been suspended pending a formal investigation. We're recommending charges of falsification of medical records, dereliction of duty, and potentially involuntary attempted manslaughter. That last one will depend on the JAG prosecutor's assessment, but given that the falsified diagnosis was being used to justify withdrawal of life support, the argument is strong. Grant stared at him. Attempted manslaughter. If that paperwork had been signed, Dr. Grant, and the ventilator had been turned off based on a diagnosis Coleman knew was fraudulent, what would you call it? Grant didn't answer. She didn't need to. Torres stood up. We'll need your full testimony, and Nurse Brooks as well. She's the one who identified the discrepancies initially. She identified more than discrepancies, Agent Torres. She saved that girl's life. Torres nodded. We're aware. At 6 o'clock, the word spread through the hospital that Coleman had been escorted from the building by NCIS agents. Not arrested, not yet, but removed from the premises with his credentials confiscated and a formal no-contact order in place regarding Emily Pierce, Admiral Pierce, and all medical staff involved in her care. Hannah heard about it from a fellow nurse while she was getting coffee from the machine in the break room. The nurse was wide-eyed, almost breathless. They walked him out the front entrance, in front of everyone. His badge, his access card, everything. Gone. Hannah poured her coffee and said nothing. She didn't feel satisfaction. She didn't feel vindication. She felt tired. The deep, marrow-level exhaustion of a person who has been carrying a weight no one else could see. She went back to Emily's room. At 7:30 that evening, something happened that no one in that hospital was prepared for. Hannah was adjusting Emily's pillow when she noticed the girl's eyes moving beneath her lids again. The lateral tracking she'd seen earlier, but faster now, more purposeful. Emily, Hannah said softly, Emily, can you hear me? The tracking stopped. Then Emily's eyelids opened, not all the way, halfway. The kind of heavy, drugged-looking opening of someone surfacing from the deepest sleep of their life. Her eyes were unfocused, glassy, moving slowly across the ceiling without fixing on anything. Hannah's breath caught. She reached for the call button but didn't press it yet. She moved into Emily's line of sight and held still. Emily, look at me. The eyes drifted, wandered, then found Hannah's face, and stopped. For 3 seconds, Emily Pierce looked at Hannah Brooks, not through her, not past her, at her, with the unmistakable awareness of a human being seeing another human being. Then the eyes closed again. Emily slipped back under. Hannah pressed the call button. Her hand was shaking. Page Dr. Grant. Page Dr. Holt. Page the Admiral. Emily Pierce just opened her eyes. Grant arrived in 9 minutes. Holt in 12. The Admiral had been in the hospital chapel. He came in at a near run, still in his dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, the most disheveled Hannah had ever seen him. She opened them, Hannah told Grant. Approximately 30 seconds of sustained eye-opening. She tracked my face and made visual contact for approximately 3 seconds before closing again. Grant checked the EEG recording. The timestamp matched Hannah's observation. A clear spike in cortical activity at the exact moment Emily's eyes opened. This is real, Grant said. This is consciousness returning. Holt studied the intracranial pressure readings. The drain is working. Pressure's down another 15% since surgery. The brain is decompressing, and it's responding exactly the way we hoped. The Admiral stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at his daughter's closed eyes. He looked at the monitors showing brain activity that hadn't existed 48 hours ago. He looked at Hannah, sitting in that same chair she'd been in for nearly 24 straight hours, with dark circles under her eyes and coffee stains on her scrubs. "Nurse Brooks," he said. "Sir, when this is over, I owe you a debt I can never repay." Hannah shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Admiral. I just did what anyone should have done 6 months ago." "But nobody did, except you." Hannah looked at Emily. She did the hard part. She stayed alive. Pierce nodded slowly. He pulled his chair to Emily's side, took her hand, and settled in for another night. At 9:15, the hospital's chief of medical staff, Rear Admiral Patricia Connors, made an unannounced visit to the ICU. She spoke privately with Grant for 20 minutes. When she emerged, her face was set in the expression of someone who had just learned the full scope of a disaster that happened on her watch. She walked into Emily's room, looked at the monitors, looked at the Admiral and said, "Jonathan, I owe you an apology that I don't have the right words for yet, but I want you to know that as of tonight, I've ordered a full internal review of every brain death determination made at this hospital in the past 3 years. Every single one." Pierce looked at her. "How many, Patricia?" Connors paused. 17. 17. "Yes. And how many of those patients are still alive?" Connors couldn't answer that question, because the truth was, she didn't know. And the possibility that even one of those 17 had been like Emily, alive behind a diagnosis that was wrong, was the kind of truth that could dismantle an institution. She left the room without another word. At 10 o'clock, Hannah finally allowed herself to close her eyes. She leaned back in the chair with Emily's hand still in hers. She didn't mean to sleep. She meant to rest for 5 minutes. But the exhaustion pulled her down the way gravity pulls a body off a cliff, sudden and total. She dreamed about Afghanistan, about a soldier she treated in a blown-out compound in Helmand, a 22-year-old Marine with a blast injury so severe that the field surgeon had called it, pronounced dead, told Hannah to prep the body bag. Hannah had pressed her fingers to the base of his skull, the same technique, the same spot, and felt the faintest pulse of response. She fought for that Marine for 6 hours. He woke up 2 days later. He went home to his family in Ohio. Last she heard, he was coaching his son's Little League team. She never told anyone about that night. She never filed a report. She just did what she was trained to do. She refused to stop when everyone else had. Emily's hand twitched in hers, and Hannah woke with a start. She looked at the clock. 11:45. She'd been out for almost 2 hours. She looked at Emily. The girl's face had changed, subtle but real. The muscles around her eyes were less slack. Her lips were slightly parted in a way that looked less like unconsciousness and more like sleep. Natural sleep. The kind of sleep a brain chooses, not the kind a damaged nervous system forces. Hannah leaned forward and whispered, "You're coming back, aren't you?" The monitor beeped its answer, steady, strong, alive. And somewhere in the basement of Walter Reed, in a storage room now sealed with NCIS evidence tape, sat a box of medical records that told the story of a doctor who had decided a girl was dead because it was easier than admitting she might not be. A box that would eventually travel to a military courtroom. A box that would change policies across every military hospital in the United States. But that was tomorrow's war. Tonight, a father held his daughter's hand. A nurse watched the monitors. And a 19-year-old girl fought her way back from the deepest darkness a living brain can know. Emily opened her eyes at 5:41 the next morning. Not halfway, not a flutter. She opened them fully, and this time they didn't drift. Hannah was awake. She had been awake since 3, unable to sleep, running on coffee and something deeper than caffeine. She saw the movement before the monitors registered it. Emily's lids pulled up, and her eyes, brown and glassy and swollen from 6 months of stillness, moved directly to Hannah's face. Hannah didn't breathe. She didn't move. She held perfectly still the way she'd been trained to hold still when a wounded soldier first regains consciousness, because any sudden input can overwhelm a brain that's just come back online. "Emily," she said softly, "you're in a hospital. You're safe. Don't try to move." Emily's eyes stayed on her, fixed, aware. The ventilator pushed air into her lungs, and her chest rose. But her eyes didn't blink with the rhythm of the machine. They blinked on their own, independently. A voluntary blink that meant the brain was running the show again, not the equipment. Hannah reached for the call button. "I'm going to get your doctor. And your dad. Don't be scared, you're okay." Emily's lips moved. No sound. The endotracheal tube made speech impossible, but the muscles of her mouth formed a shape, and Hannah, who had read the lips of soldiers in deafening combat zones, recognized it instantly. "Dad." Hannah pressed the button. "Page Dr. Grant. Page Dr. Holt. Get the Admiral. She's awake." Grant arrived at 5:53. She walked in and stopped 2 steps from the bed when she saw Emily's open eyes tracking her movement across the room. "Emily, I'm Dr. Grant. I'm your neurologist. Can you hear me?" Emily blinked once, slow, deliberate. "Blink once for yes, twice for no. Do you understand?" 1 blink. Grant moved closer. "Do you know where you are?" 1 blink. "Are you in pain?" Emily paused, then 1 blink. Grant looked at Hannah. "Let's get her pain managed. Fentanyl, 2 micrograms per kilo. Low and slow. I don't want to suppress what we're seeing." Hannah was already moving. The Admiral came through the door at 5:58. He was half-dressed. His shirt was untucked. His shoes were untied. He had been in the family sleep room down the hall, and he had run. A 3-star Admiral ran through a hospital in untied shoes because his daughter was awake. He stopped at the foot of the bed. Emily's eyes moved to him. They moved to him the way a compass moves to north, automatic and absolute. Pierce stepped forward. His hands were trembling. The hands that had gripped the rails of warships in 30-foot seas were trembling. "Emily," she blinked. Her right hand moved on the blanket, fingers reaching for him. Pierce took her hand and held it in both of his. He tried to speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He tried again, failed again. A man who had briefed presidents and commanded thousands could not form a single word because his daughter was looking at him for the first time in 6 months. Emily squeezed his hand. Pierce made a sound. Not a word, not a cry. A sound that came from somewhere so deep inside him that it didn't have a name. He pressed his forehead to their joined hands, and his shoulders heaved. Hannah turned away. Not out of discomfort, out of respect. Some moments are too sacred to witness head-on. Grant let it last. She stood by the door with her arms at her sides and let the Admiral hold his daughter's hand and fall apart. She waited a full minute before she spoke. "Admiral, I need to examine her. It won't take long." Pierce straightened. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and didn't apologize for the tears. "Go ahead." Grant conducted a rapid neurological assessment. She tested eye tracking. Emily followed her finger, left, right, up, down, smooth, controlled. She tested grip strength. Right hand, moderate. Left hand, weak, but present. She asked Emily to wiggle her toes. The right foot responded. The left didn't. "Lateralized recovery," Grant said. "That's consistent with the compression pattern. The right hemisphere is decompressing faster than the left. This is expected." She turned to the Admiral. "Sir, this is remarkable progress, but I need you to understand what the next phase looks like. Emily is conscious. She's aware, but she has 6 months of muscle atrophy, neurological rebuilding, and cognitive recovery ahead of her. This is a marathon. I've run marathons before. Not like this one. Pierce looked at Emily. She has too. Grant nodded. I want to discuss extubation, getting the breathing tube out. Her respiratory effort has been improving since surgery, and if she can sustain adequate oxygen levels on her own for 30 minutes, I'd like to remove it today. Today? The sooner she breathes on her own, the sooner we can assess speech and swallowing function. And frankly, Admiral, your daughter has earned the right to breathe without a machine. The extubation trial began at 8 o'clock. Grant reduced the ventilator support incrementally over 30 minutes, watching Emily's oxygen saturation with the focus of someone defusing an explosive. Emily's body fought for every breath. Her chest heaved, her nostrils flared, her oxygen levels dipped to 91%, and Grant held up a hand to stop the respiratory therapist from intervening. Give her a minute. Hannah watched Emily's face. She saw the strain, she saw the effort, and she saw something else. Determination. The jaw set, the eyes focused, the same stubborn refusal to quit that had kept her brain alive for 6 months under a wall of pressure. Oxygen climbed back to 93, then 94, then 96. She's holding, the respiratory therapist said. Grant waited the full 30 minutes. Emily maintained. Her breathing was shallow and labored, but it was hers. Remove the tube, Grant said. The extubation took 15 seconds. Emily gagged, coughed, her face contorted with the shock of breathing room air for the first time in half a year. Hannah supported her head and whispered, "You're okay. Breathe. Just breathe." Emily took a ragged, ugly, beautiful breath, then another, then another. The ventilator stood silent beside the bed. The machine that had kept Emily Pierce alive for 6 months was no longer needed. Pierce watched from the foot of the bed with his fist pressed against his mouth. His eyes were red, but his gaze was steady. He was watching his daughter breathe on her own, and the weight of that, the sheer magnitude of what it meant, was rewriting something inside him that had been broken since the night of the accident. At 8:45, Emily spoke. It wasn't a word, it was a croak. A dry, rasping sound forced through vocal cords that hadn't been used since October. But it was voluntary. It was intentional. She was trying to say something. Anna brought a small cup of ice chips and placed one on Emily's lips. Slow, let the ice melt. Don't try to talk yet. Emily ignored her. She opened her mouth and pushed air through her throat with the force of someone who had been silent for too long and refused to stay silent 1 second more. Da! Pierce stepped forward. Dad. One word. Broken. Barely audible. The most powerful sound that hospital had heard in 6 months. Pierce grabbed the bed rail to keep himself upright. I'm here, Em. I'm right here. How long? Hannah and Grant exchanged a look. This was the question they knew would come, the one they couldn't soften. Pierce sat on the edge of the bed and took both of Emily's hands. 6 months, kid. Emily's eyes widened. Her grip tightened. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the walls. She looked at the IV lines and the monitors and the hospital gown she was wearing, and Hannah could see the reality crashing into her like a wave. 6 months of her life. Gone. Lost inside her own body. Emily's breathing accelerated. The monitor spiked. Heart rate climbing. 100, 110, 115. She's panicking, Grant said. Emily, look at me. Look at me. You're safe. You're here. You're breathing on your own. Focus on my voice. Emily's eyes locked onto Grant. Her chest heaved, but Grant's voice was an anchor, steady and firm, and slowly the heart rate began to descend. 110, 105, 98. Good, Grant said. Good. You're doing great. Emily looked at her father. Was I dead? Pierce's face went rigid. No. They said, they were wrong, Emily. They were wrong. and we're going to deal with that. But not right now. Right now you focus on getting stronger. Emily closed her eyes, not from unconsciousness, from exhaustion. The effort of waking up, breathing, speaking and processing 6 lost months had drained everything she had. Rest, Hannah said. We'll be here when you wake up. Emily's hand found Hannah's, squeezed, held on. She slept for 4 hours, real sleep, brain-generated, natural, restorative sleep. The EEG showed it clearly, normal sleep architecture, cycles of deep and light activity rolling through her brain like tides. When she woke at 1 in the afternoon, she was sharper. Her eyes were clearer. Her voice was still a wreck, but she could string 3 and 4 words together. Water, she said. Real water. Hannah brought a cup with a straw. Emily drank slowly, and when the cold water hit her throat, she closed her eyes and made a sound that was almost a laugh. I forgot, she whispered. I forgot what water tastes like. That afternoon, Grant began a formal cognitive assessment. She started with basic orientation. Emily knew her name. She knew her father's name. She knew she was in a hospital. She didn't know the date, but she knew the year. She didn't remember the accident, which Grant said was common with traumatic brain injuries. She remembered the Naval Academy. She remembered her roommate's name. She remembered her Sunday morning calls with her father. I miss them, she said, looking at Pierce. I missed calling you. I know, kid. Were you here the whole time? Every day. Emily's eyes filled. I knew, somehow. I knew you were here. I could feel it, like pressure, like someone holding me from the outside. Hannah looked at the cardiac monitor data she'd recorded over the past 6 months. Every time Pierce had spoken to Emily, her heart rate had elevated. Every single time. Even when the machine said she was dead, some part of her had been listening. At 3 o'clock, Agent Torres from NCIS returned to the hospital. He didn't come to see Emily. He came to see Hannah. They met in the same conference room where Coleman had tried to force the Admiral to sign the withdrawal form. Torres sat across from her with a recorder on the table and a look on his face that told Hannah this wasn't a casual conversation. Nurse Brooks, I need to take a formal statement from you regarding your observations and actions in the case of Emily Pierce. I understand. Before we begin, I want to inform you of something that came up during our investigation. Torres opened a folder. We pulled your full service record. Hannah went still. Staff Sergeant Hannah Brooks, 68th Forward Surgical Team, Special Operations Command, Helmand Province, 2014 through 2016. 2 Bronze Stars, 1 for Valor. Combat Medic Badge, Honorable Discharge. Hannah said nothing. Torres looked at her. You didn't put any of that on your nursing application. It wasn't relevant. With respect, Nurse Brooks, it's extremely relevant. The technique you used to identify Emily's brainstem response is a field procedure developed by Special Operations medical personnel. You learned it during deployment. It's not in any civilian training program. Your military background is directly connected to your ability to diagnose what every other physician in this hospital missed. Hannah sat with her hands folded on the table. I left the military because I wanted a new life. I didn't want to be defined by what I did over there. I wanted to be a nurse. Just a nurse. Torres closed the folder. You're going to be a lot more than that after this case, whether you want to be or not. The charges against Coleman are moving forward. Falsification of medical records. Dereliction of duty. The JAG prosecutor is also pursuing a charge of attempted involuntary manslaughter. Manslaughter. If the Admiral had signed that form and Coleman knew the diagnosis was false, the withdrawal of life support would have resulted in Emily's death. That's a killing based on a fraudulent medical determination. In military law, that carries severe consequences. Hannah absorbed this. What about the second physician, Hendricks? Hendricks cooperated fully. He confirmed he never participated in the evaluation and never signed the document. He's been cleared. He's also furious. His exact words were, Coleman used my name to kill a kid. The signature on the document is a forgery. Our handwriting analyst confirmed it. Coleman forged it himself? That's what the evidence shows. He conducted the evaluation improperly, suppressed evidence of brain function by testing under sedation, then forged a co-signature to validate his findings, all to close a case that was inconvenient for his department. Hannah looked at the table. He did it because she was taking up a bed. Torres didn't confirm or deny, but his silence said everything. There's one more thing, Torres said. Rear Admiral Connors has ordered a review of all brain death determinations at this facility over the past 3 years. 17 cases. We've already found irregularities in 2 of them. Hannah looked up. What kind of irregularities? Similar patterns, insufficient washout periods, incomplete documentation. One case where the second confirming physician was a resident who later said he felt pressure to sign by the attending. Who was the attending? Coleman. Hannah's hands flattened on the table. How many of those 17 patients are still alive? Torres held her gaze. Of the 17, 12 had life support withdrawn following the brain death determination. 5 are still on long-term care. We're reevaluating all 5. And the 12? Torres didn't answer. He didn't need to. Hannah walked out of that conference room and went straight to the bathroom at the end of the hallway. She locked the door, pressed her back against the wall, and slid to the floor. She didn't cry in Afghanistan. Not once. Not when she lost patience. Not when she held a 20-year-old Marine's hand while he died on a stretcher in the dirt. She had trained herself to hold it together because in combat, falling apart gets people killed. But she wasn't in combat anymore. She cried for 7 minutes. For Emily. For the 12 patients who never got the chance Emily got. For the system that was supposed to protect the most vulnerable people on Earth and had instead protected itself. Then she washed her face, straightened her scrubs, and walked back to Emily's room. Emily was sitting up, supported by pillows, her back against the raised bed, but upright. For the first time in 6 months, she was vertical. Her face was pale. Her muscles barely held her, but she was sitting up and looking at the door when Hannah walked in. There she is, Emily said. Her voice was still rough, still broken, but there was something in it now that hadn't been there that morning. Warmth. Hannah smiled. It was the first time she'd smiled in days. Look at you, sitting up like a real person. I feel like garbage. You look great. Liar. Hannah adjusted Emily's IV line and checked the monitors. Everything was stable. Blood pressure, normal. Heart rate resting at 78. Oxygen saturation, 97% on room air. No ventilator, no assisted breathing, just Emily. Hannah, Emily said. Yeah? My dad told me what you did, what you found, the chart, the test, the thing behind my ear. Hannah shook her head. Your dad gives me too much credit. He said you walked into a room full of people who outranked you and told them they were wrong. I told them the truth. That's different. Emily reached out and grabbed Hannah's wrist. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were fierce. Nobody else did. For 6 months. Nobody else even looked. Hannah put her hand over Emily's. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Me too, Emily whispered. Because I was in there, Hannah. I was in there the whole time. Hannah froze. What do you mean? I mean, I was aware. Not all the time, not clearly. It was like being trapped underwater in the dark. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't open my eyes. But I could hear things. Pieces. My dad's voice. The machines. And I could feel it when someone was in the room. I could feel it when someone touched my hand. Hannah sat down slowly. You felt that. I felt everything. I felt them talking about turning off the machines. I heard the doctor say I was dead, and I was screaming inside my own head and nothing came out. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Do you know what that's like? To hear someone say you're dead and know you're not? To feel your father crying next to you and not be able to tell him you're still here. Hannah gripped Emily's hand. You're here now. Because of you. Because of you. You stayed alive, Emily. Your brain held on. I just found what you were already fighting for. Emily held Hannah's hand and didn't let go. The monitor beeped. Steady, strong. The rhythm of a heart that had refused to stop even when the world decided it should. At 6 o'clock that evening, physical therapy began. It was brutal. Emily couldn't lift her right arm above her shoulder. She couldn't move her left leg at all. She tried to grip a foam ball, and her fingers barely dented the surface. The physical therapist, Lieutenant Sarah Cho, was patient but direct. 6 months of atrophy means we're essentially rebuilding from zero. This is going to take months. Some function may not return fully. Emily squeezed the ball again. Her hand trembled. The ball barely compressed. She gritted her teeth and squeezed harder. Her face turned red. A vein pulsed in her neck. The ball compressed half an inch. Again, Emily said. Emily, we can rest in... Again. She squeezed 14 times before her hand gave out. When her fingers finally uncurled, she was breathing hard and covered in sweat. She looked at Hannah. 14. Tomorrow I'll do 20. Hannah adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. I believe you. At 8 o'clock, the Admiral sat alone with his daughter for the first time since she'd woken up. Hannah stepped outside to give them privacy. She stood in the hallway and listened to the murmur of their voices through the closed door. She couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. She heard Emily laugh. It was small, broken, more like a cough that accidentally found joy. But it was a laugh. The first laugh in 6 months. And it traveled through that closed door and hit Hannah in the chest like a bullet she never saw coming. She leaned against the wall and pressed her hand over her heart and let it hurt. Because that sound, that ugly, beautiful, impossible laugh, was everything. It was proof that 6 months of darkness and silence and a diagnosis that should have killed her hadn't taken the one thing Emily Pierce refused to give up. Herself. At 10 o'clock, Hannah checked on Emily one last time. The girl was asleep, real sleep, deep, natural, healing sleep. Pierce was in the chair beside her, awake, watching her breathe the way he had watched her every night for 6 months. But tonight his face was different. The grief was still there, the anger was still there, but layered over both of them was something Hannah recognized because she'd felt it herself 1,000 times in 1,000 dusty rooms in Afghanistan. Gratitude so deep, it has no words. Pierce looked up at Hannah. She laughed tonight. I heard. First time since the accident. I know. Pierce looked back at his daughter. She told me she could hear me. All those months, she could hear me talking to her. She told me too. Pierce was quiet for a long time. I almost signed that paper, Hannah. I was sitting in that room with the pen in my hand. If you hadn't stepped forward, I would have signed it, and my daughter would be dead right now. Hannah stood in the doorway. But you didn't sign it. Because you gave me a reason not to. She gave you the reason, Admiral. I just showed you where to look. Pierce nodded slowly. Then he did something that caught Hannah completely off guard. He stood up, walked to the door, and extended his hand. Not a handshake, an open hand, palm up, the way one soldier offers trust to another. Hannah took it. They stood there for a moment, a 3-star admiral and a former combat medic, connected by the hand of a girl who had clawed her way back from a place no medical textbook said she could return from. Pierce squeezed once. Firm, final. Thank you. Then he went back to his chair, back to his daughter, back to the watch he had kept for 6 months and would keep for as long as it took. Hannah walked down the hallway toward the nursing station. Her shift had ended 4 hours ago. She hadn't clocked out. She never did, not since this started. Her phone buzzed, a text from Grant. Connors wants to see us tomorrow at 0800. Bring everything you have. They're expanding the investigation. Hannah typed back 3 words. "I'll be there." She pocketed the phone and kept walking. Behind her, in room 412 of the ICU at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, a 19-year-old girl slept under the watch of a father who had almost lost her to a lie. And in a storage room 3 floors below, sealed with evidence tape, a box of falsified records waited for the justice that was finally coming. The meeting with Rear Admiral Patricia Connors started at 0800 the next morning and lasted 3 hours. Hannah brought everything: the handwritten notebook, the copied medication logs, the staff schedules, the timeline she had built showing every discrepancy between Coleman's documentation and the actual events. She laid it all on the table in Connors' office and walked the Admiral through it piece by piece. Connors didn't interrupt. She listened with the stillness of someone absorbing a disaster that had happened directly beneath her authority. When Hannah finished, Connors sat back and looked at her for a long moment. "How long did it take you to find all of this?" "7 days, ma'am. From my first day on the ICU floor to the morning I stepped forward." 7 days. Connors shook her head. "You found in 7 days what this entire institution missed in 6 months. "They didn't miss it, ma'am. They chose not to look." Connors flinched. It was small, barely visible, but Hannah saw it. The truth of that statement hit the Rear Admiral like a slap, because she knew it applied to her too. She was the chief of medical staff. Everything that happened under this roof was ultimately her responsibility. And for 6 months, she had trusted the system instead of questioning it. "Nurse Brooks, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I need an honest answer." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you believe Dr. Coleman acted alone?" Hannah had been waiting for this question. She had turned it over in her mind every night since the investigation began. "I believe Coleman made the decision and falsified the records himself, but I believe the culture of this hospital made it possible. Nobody questioned him, not the nurses on the floor, not the residents rotating through the ICU, not administration. He operated in an environment where efficiency mattered more than accuracy, and where challenging an attending physician's diagnosis was treated as insubordination rather than due diligence." Connors absorbed that. "You're describing a systemic failure." "Yes, ma'am, I am." Connors turned to Grant, who had been sitting quietly through the entire briefing. "Dr. Grant, do you concur?" Grant didn't hesitate. "Completely. The protocols exist on paper, the safeguards exist in policy, but they failed in practice because the culture doesn't support them. A second physician is supposed to independently confirm brain death. That's the firewall. But if the second physician is pressured, or if the signature is forged, the firewall doesn't exist. It's theater." Connors stood up and walked to the window. She stood there for a full minute without speaking. When she turned back, her face had changed. The administrative caution was gone. In its place was the officer. "Effective immediately, I am implementing a new brain death protocol for this hospital. All evaluations will require 3 independent confirming physicians, none of whom may be from the same department. All evaluations will be recorded on video from start to finish. All medication logs will be independently verified by pharmacy before testing begins. And no brain death determination will be finalized without my personal review and signature." She looked at Hannah. "I'd like you to consult on the development of these protocols, Nurse Brooks. Your field experience with brainstem assessment is exactly the kind of knowledge we've been missing." Hannah shook her head. "I'm a floor nurse, ma'am. I don't have the rank for that." "You didn't have the rank to save Emily Pierce either. That didn't stop you." Hannah held Connor's gaze. Then she nodded. "I'll do it." They walked out of that meeting at 1100. Grant fell into step beside Hannah in the hallway and said quietly, "You know what you just agreed to is going to change every military hospital in the country." "I agreed to help write a protocol." "You agreed to put your name on the thing that proves the old system was broken. Every doctor who ever signed off on a brain death determination without doing their due diligence is going to see your work as an accusation." "Is it?" Grant looked at her sideways. It should be. Hannah went straight from the meeting to Emily's room. She hadn't seen her since the night before, and what she found when she walked in made her stop in the doorway. Emily was sitting on the edge of the bed, not propped up by pillows, sitting, her feet hanging over the side, her hands gripping the mattress, her body trembling with the effort. Lieutenant Cho stood in front of her with both hands out, ready to catch her if she fell. 5 more seconds, Emily. Hold it. Emily's arms shook. Her jaw clenched. Sweat ran down her temples. She looked like she was about to collapse. 3 seconds. Emily's left hand slipped, her body tilted. Cho lunged forward, but before she could catch her, Emily slammed her hand back down on the mattress and pushed herself upright. I'm not done, Emily said through her teeth. 2 seconds. I said I'm not done. 1. Time. You can relax. Emily didn't relax. She stayed sitting upright, breathing hard, staring straight ahead with the kind of defiance that Hannah had only ever seen in soldiers who refused to be carried off a battlefield. Cho turned and saw Hannah in the doorway. She's been doing this for 20 minutes. I told her to stop at 10. She told me to get out. Hannah walked to the bed. How do you feel? Emily looked up at her. Like I got hit by a car. She paused. Oh, wait. Hannah stared at her. Then she laughed. The sound surprised both of them. It was the first time Hannah had laughed in longer than she could remember. That's not funny, Hannah said. It's a little funny. It's not. You laughed. I'm tired. Tired people laugh at bad jokes. Emily grinned. It was crooked and exhausted and absolutely beautiful. Sit down, Hannah. You look worse than I do. Hannah sat, and for the first time since this all began, the two of them just existed in the same space without a crisis between them. No monitors screaming, no doctors arguing, no paperwork being shoved across tables. Just 2 women, one in a hospital gown and one in wrinkled scrubs, sitting side by side. Hannah. Yeah. My dad told me about your record, Afghanistan, the surgeries, the Bronze Stars. Hannah stiffened. He shouldn't have. Why not? Because it doesn't matter. Emily turned to look at her. It matters to me. You left all of that behind and started over. You walked into this hospital as nobody. You could have kept your head down and done your job, and nobody would have blamed you. But you didn't. Emily, let me finish. I was in the dark for 6 months. I could hear pieces of what was happening around me, but I couldn't do anything. I couldn't fight. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even open my eyes. And the worst part wasn't the darkness. The worst part was knowing that the people who were supposed to help me had given up. I could feel it. Every day. The way they moved around me. The way they talked about me like I was already gone. Like I was furniture they hadn't thrown out yet. Emily's voice broke. She swallowed hard and kept going. And then you showed up. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know your name. But I felt something change. The way you touched my hand was different. The way you checked the monitors was different. You were paying attention. You were actually looking at me. And for the first time in 6 months, I felt like someone in that room believed I was still a person. Hannah's eyes burned. She pressed her lips together and held it in, because she was not going to cry in front of this girl who had survived something worse than anything Hannah had ever faced in combat. I was doing my job, Hannah said. No, you were doing what nobody else had the courage to do. That's not a job. That's who you are. Hannah looked at the floor. She didn't trust her voice. Emily reached over and took her hand. Thank you for pressing behind my ear that day, for fighting Coleman, for staying with me every night, for not giving up. Hannah squeezed her hand. You're the one who didn't give up, Emily. I just showed up late. You showed up on time. That's all that matters. That afternoon, NCIS delivered its preliminary findings to the JAG prosecutor's office. The case against Coleman was moving to formal charges. falsification of military medical records, dereliction of duty resulting in endangerment, attempted involuntary manslaughter, forgery of a fellow officer's signature. Coleman hired a civilian defense attorney. The attorney filed a motion arguing that the brain death diagnosis was a legitimate medical judgment and that any irregularities in documentation were administrative errors, not criminal acts. Agent Torres told Grant the motion would be denied. The shadow copy of the medical record proves he attempted to alter evidence after the investigation began. That's consciousness of guilt. The forgery of Hendrix's signature proves premeditation. Administrative errors don't involve forging another doctor's name. The expanded review of the 17 previous brain death cases was also producing results. Of the 5 patients still on long-term care, 2 showed signs of brainstem activity when re-evaluated using the updated protocols. 2 patients, 2 people who had been classified as dead and were not. When Hannah heard this, she went quiet for a long time. She sat in the break room and stared at her hands and thought about the 12 who had already had their life support withdrawn. 12 people who might have been alive. 12 people whose families signed papers and said goodbye and buried someone who might have still been fighting. She would never know for certain. Nobody would. The dead don't get reevaluated, but the living do. 1 week after Emily's surgery, she stood up. Lieutenant Cho held her under the arms. Hannah stood in front of her. The Admiral watched from the doorway because Emily had asked him to stay back. "I want to do this without you catching me, Dad. I need to know I can." Pierce stayed where he was. His hands gripped the doorframe so hard the wood creaked. Emily's legs shook. Her left leg, the weaker one, buckled almost immediately. Cho caught her weight. Emily grabbed the bed rail with her right hand and pulled herself upright. "Again," Emily said. She tried again. The left leg held for 2 seconds, then 3, then 5. On the 4th attempt, she stood for a full 8 seconds under her own power before her muscles gave out and Cho eased her back onto the bed. Emily looked at her father. 8 seconds. Pierce nodded. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. 8 seconds. Tomorrow it'll be 10. I know it will. And then 12. And then 20. And then I'm going to walk out of this hospital on my own 2 feet. Pierce released the doorframe. He walked to his daughter and kissed the top of her head. "I never doubted it." "Liar," Emily said. "Okay, I doubted it for about 6 months, but not anymore." Emily laughed again. That broken, gorgeous laugh that filled the room like oxygen. Over the next 3 weeks, Emily's recovery accelerated in ways that surprised even Grant. Her speech returned fully. Her cognitive function tested within normal ranges. Her right side regained near-complete motor control. Her left side lagged behind, but the gains were consistent. Every day a little more. Every day a little stronger. She walked with a walker at the end of week 2. She walked with a cane at the end of week 3. She walked unassisted 10 steps across the room on day 25. Hannah was there for every step. Not as a nurse, not as a medic, as the person Emily reached for when the pain was too much and the frustration was too sharp and the weight of 6 lost months pressed down on her like a physical force. They talked during the late shifts. Emily told Hannah about the academy, about her roommate, a girl from Texas named Maria, who sent flowers every day for the first 2 months, and then stopped because nobody told her Emily could still feel them. Hannah told Emily about Afghanistan, about the Marine in Helmand she had saved with the same technique, about the decision to leave the military and start over. "Do you regret it?" Emily asked. "Leaving?" Hannah thought about it. "I regret that I had to choose. I regret that the military made me feel like I couldn't be a soldier and a healer at the same time. But I don't regret being here. I don't regret walking onto this floor and finding you." "I don't regret it either," Emily said. "Weird thing to say about the worst 6 months of my life. But if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have met you." "That's a terrible silver lining." "It's mine. I'm keeping it." On day 30, the Admiral held a private meeting with Rear Admiral Connors, Dr. Grant, Captain Holt, and Hannah. He stood at the head of the table and spoke in the voice he used on the bridge of a warship, clear, measured, and carrying the weight of absolute authority. I want to make something clear to everyone in this room. What happened to my daughter was not a medical error. It was a crime. And it was a crime enabled by a system that prioritized institutional convenience over human life. I intend to ensure that what happened to Emily never happens to another patient in any military hospital. He looked at Connors. Patricia, the protocol reforms are a start, but they're not enough. I'm requesting a congressional hearing on brain death determination standards across the Department of Defense medical system. Connors nodded. I'll support it. Pierce looked at Grant. Dr. Grant, I'd like you to serve as the expert medical witness. It would be my honor, Admiral. Pierce looked at Hannah. Nurse Brooks, I'd like you to testify. Hannah felt every eye in the room on her. Sir, I'm not comfortable with publicity. I'm not asking you to be comfortable. I'm asking you to tell the truth in front of people who need to hear it. The same truth you told in my daughter's ICU room. The same truth you told when everyone else in this hospital chose silence. Hannah held his gaze. Yes, sir. I'll testify. On day 32, Emily Pierce walked out of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center on her own 2 feet. She used a cane. Her left leg dragged slightly. Her steps were uneven and slow. But she walked. The Admiral walked beside her, not holding her arm, not supporting her weight, just walking beside his daughter the way a father walks beside a child who has finally learned to stand on her own. Hannah stood at the hospital entrance and watched them go. She had said her goodbye to Emily that morning in the room. Emily had hugged her so hard that Hannah felt her ribs creak, and when she pulled back, Emily's face was wet. You saved my life, Emily said. You saved your own life. I just opened the door. Then thank you for opening the door. Emily reached under her pillow and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She pressed it into Hannah's hand. Read it later. Hannah nodded. She didn't trust herself to say more. Now she stood at the entrance and watched Emily's slow, unsteady, triumphant walk toward the Admiral's car. Halfway across the parking lot, Emily stopped. She turned around and looked back at the hospital. She found Hannah in the entrance, and Emily Pierce, 19 years old, Naval Academy sophomore, daughter of a 3-star admiral, a girl who had been declared dead and refused to accept the diagnosis, raised her right hand to her forehead. A salute, trembling, imperfect, crooked at the elbow because her right side still wasn't fully recovered, but a salute. Hannah pressed her lips together. She didn't return it. She wanted to. Every fiber of the soldier still buried inside her wanted to snap to attention and give this girl the sharpest salute she had ever thrown. But that wasn't who she was anymore. She had chosen a different life, a different way of serving. She raised her hand and placed it over her own heart, and she held it there until Emily smiled, turned around, and walked the rest of the way to the car. The Admiral opened the passenger door for his daughter. Emily lowered herself in slowly, carefully, wincing as her left leg bent. Pierce closed the door and looked back at the hospital one last time. He found Hannah standing in the entrance. He raised his hand, not a salute, not a wave, just an open palm held up for a moment, an acknowledgement between two people who understood what had almost been lost. Then he got in the car and drove his daughter home. Hannah waited until the car disappeared around the corner. Then she unfolded the piece of paper Emily had given her. It was a handwritten note. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, the penmanship of someone whose fine motor skills were still rebuilding. But every word was legible. Hannah, for 6 months I was trapped in the dark and everyone told my father I was gone. You put your fingers behind my ear and pulled me back into the world. I will never forget that. I will never forget you. When I graduate from the academy, and I will graduate, I'm requesting assignment to military medicine. Because of you. You showed me that sometimes the person who saves your life isn't the one with the highest rank or the biggest title. It's the one who refuses to stop looking when everyone else has turned away. I love you for that, Emily. Hannah folded the note and put it in the breast pocket of her scrubs, directly over her heart. She stood there for another minute. Then she turned and walked back inside the hospital. She had a shift starting in 20 minutes. There were patients on the floor who needed vitals checked and medications administered and charts reviewed. She clipped her badge to her scrubs. Nurse Hannah Brooks. No rank, no stars, no title that mattered to anyone walking past her in the hallway. She stopped at the nursing station and picked up her first chart of the day. Room 418, new admission. A 23-year-old Marine with a traumatic brain injury sustained in a training exercise. Glasgow Coma Scale of 4. The attending had already documented poor prognosis in the initial notes. Hannah read the chart. She looked at the vitals. She looked at the medication log. Then she walked into that room and started looking. Because that was the lesson Emily Pierce had carved into the walls of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center with 6 months of silence and a heartbeat that would not stop. The people who save lives aren't always the ones with the power to do it. They're the ones with the courage to try when everyone else has decided it's over. And sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to look away.